Hello and welcome to the Farming Week, the podcast brought to you by Agriland.ie, keeping you up to date with all the latest in Irish agriculture. I'm Charles O'Donnell and I'm joined by Aisling O'Brien, Breifne O'Brien and Cathal O'Shea. Well, we hope you're keeping warm whatever way you can. It's a cold one today. Cold enough that Met Éireann has issued a low temperature warning for several counties. The National Forecaster has issued the status yellow warning for counties Carlow, Kildare, Kilkenny, Laois, Longford, Meath, Offaly, Tipperary, Westmeath and Wicklow. The alert will come into force at 11pm tonight and will remain in force until 8am tomorrow morning, Friday. But moving on to this week's agri-news, and milk prices paid to farmers have unfortunately seen further cuts in the last week, in keeping with the trend in recent months. Aisling, can you bring us up to speed?
Yes, Charles, as we were saying just last week here on the podcast, it has been a very difficult few months for dairy farmers with milk price cuts across the board by processors, and it has continued, as you said, this week. Further announcements of milk price cuts from Carberry Group, from Tirlawn, from Dairygold and from Kerry Dairy Ireland, which of course followed on from Lakeland Dairy's announcement of a price cut as well last week. And you can find full details of all of those processor announcements on our website and app. And I suppose it all comes back to, Charles, milk supplies globally running far too ahead of what demand can absorb out there, and as a result dairy market sentiment remains weak as these very strong global milk supplies continue to exceed the demand, and the supply growth coming from all major exporting regions, which is compounding this. And this imbalance then is of course going to be impacting various dairy commodities, but in particular butter, cheese and milk powder returns, which are affecting our processors here at home. And what we are hearing this week is that this may be reflected in the futures markets for the foreseeable future, and analysts on the outlook for dairy on the global stage, including those in Rabobank, have said that demand remains soft amid inflation and weak confidence. And dairy prices fell across the board as well this week, Charles, in the latest global dairy trade GDT auction. And as a result, the GDT price index dipped by a further 3% after Tuesday's event. Now, of course, that auction, which is held twice every month, is a trading platform for core dairy products. And the worst performers this time round were butter and anhydrous milk fat, while cheddar also had a disappointing drop as well in terms of average price. And look, against that backdrop here at home, the Irish Farmers Association said this week that processors will also have to share the pain during the current dairy market downturn. And the IFA's Dairy Committee Chair Martin McIlerney called on milk processors to work with dairy farmers in sharing the financial cost of the current challenges facing this sector. And he said in the space of 3 months, dairy processors have undertaken what he called savage milk price cuts, with as much as 10 cent a litre taken off the base milk price. And he said that farmers feel completely exposed to these cuts, and they're rightly asking why they seem to always be the first to pay the price when the markets decline. And he said since September, the price that dairy farmers received has fallen by over 20%, while the overall cost of production remains unchanged. And he said that farmers are asking at the moment, Charles, could processors have done more to lock in product earlier in the year when market returns were higher, which would have insulated milk producers to some extent from the swings that are now being imposed, these cuts that are now being imposed on farmers as well. So look, it has unfortunately been another bad week in terms of announcements for milk price.
And just while we're on the dairy sector, Aisling, there was a notable business development for one processor this week.
Yes, Charles, Tirlawn announced last Friday plans for a €126 million investment in its whey processing facilities in Ballyraggart in County Kilkenny. And the co-op said this significant investment marks an important step in Tirlawn's value-add journey, and it will enable the co-op to expand its whey processing and product innovation capabilities. And the new facility is going to focus on the production of an advanced nutritional whey protein product portfolio, including clear whey protein, which we're told is an increasingly popular product among lifestyle consumers. And once it's operational, the facility, we're told, will significantly increase Tirlawn's capacity and flexibility to create these high value products as well. And that obviously is a boost, I suppose, for farmers in that area, that value add. But unfortunately, it might not soften the blow of the milk price cuts in the more immediate future.
We're going to bring in Agriland technical journalist Breifne O'Brien now. Breifne, there was good news this week for young sheep farmers. Can you take us up to speed on that?
Yeah, Charles. So on Monday there, we've seen Keepack announce details of, I suppose it's essentially a price top-up for young farmers, for young sheep farmers, where there will be a 20 cent per kilo premium paid on O and O grade lambs and a 30 cent per kilo premium paid on E and U grade lambs. So Cullio's will also attract an additional 10 cent a kilo price bonus through this group. So I suppose it's essentially a young sheep farmer grouping that, and Keepack are essentially trying to put their money where their mouth is when it comes to supporting generational renewal in the sheep sector and supporting young farmers. And I suppose it is being welcomed and it's been seen as a positive move by the sheep processor, in the sense that, you know, it's supporting young farmers who are actively on the ground producing lambs. It's a positive step by all accounts. And then this was announced, I suppose, in conjunction with a report that was put together by a group of young sheep farmers called the Keepack Young Sheep Farmer Forum. And this identified, I suppose, some of the barriers for young people getting into farming and I suppose what needs to be done. And this was handed to the Minister last week at Ag House on Kildare Street. So yeah, definitely positive news this week coming in the form of price bonuses for young sheep farmers who are supplying lambs and Cullios to Keepack processing outlets.
Moving over to beef, Breifne, you were at the Teagasc National Beef Conference this week in Athenry, County Galway. What were the main takeaways from that?
Yeah, Charles, so look, there was a really big crowd down in Athenry earlier this week at the National Beef Conference, and you know, the mood was definitely positive across the board. There was a lot of topics covered, really. There was, I suppose, two sessions. The first one was focused primarily on weanling production and, you know, producing that weanling that's in high demand in the market, be it for, you know, domestic farmers buying that animal to bring on to finish, or be it for the export market. I suppose there was just some tips and advice there on what farmers can do, you know, body condition on cows to make sure that they're going back in calf and that 365 day calving interval is retained. There was also some interesting bits and pieces around myostatin and, you know, what to look out for. And I suppose a lot of it was about these double muscle calves and how to predict the chances essentially of a double muscle calf, and I suppose the benefits of genotyping your cows to know what genes they're carrying, if any of the myostatin genes. So the second session then was focused more so on, I suppose, you know, the whole aspect of profits, prices and farm succession essentially. So profits, prices and passing on the farm is what the second session of the event looked at. So this heard from Gera's meat director Rupert Claxton, who gave an interesting presentation on the Mercosur deal. He highlighted some statistics and gave a little bit of an outlook also on how he perceives the beef trade to go in the short term. And look, there was a lot of very positive sounding from him on his, you know, his predictions for beef price for the next 2 years at least. So thankfully there is some positive soundings in his forecast. He also spoke a little bit about Mercosur, and he said he's not that panicked about Mercosur, which I suppose was an interesting point. He highlighted that since 2018, from 2018 to 2026 forecasts in Europe, when the UK beef production is excluded, the beef production in Europe is down 830,000 tonnes in that time. And, you know, the proposed Mercosur deal will see 99,000 tonnes of beef coming in. So in his opinion, he said he wouldn't be overly concerned, and it's not a big panic. Naturally enough, this opinion has been met with opposition by the Irish farm organisations who would think differently on the proposed Mercosur deal. But it was one of the interesting points highlighted on the night. Next up, we had the IFAC accountant and suckler farmer Trevor Boland, who was speaking on tax management tips for farmers, and a little bit on farm succession as well. So it was a really interesting presentation. He invited farmers to really consider investing in their farms, their families and their future. So, you know, he talked a little bit about farmers looking at their pensions and maybe investing into that, and he really had a big emphasis on making sure that farms are a safe place to work. So maybe, you know, if there was any little bit of extra money around this year, to maybe invest it in things that will make, you know, cattle easier managed, the farm a safer place overall for the farmer to work and to be. Then I suppose before the closing remarks, there was a bit of a panel discussion there on farm succession, you know, on different paths and different options that are available, you know, in relation to, you know, getting young people involved and having some level of financial control of farms. And there was a good panel discussion there which featured Yall beef farmers, father and son duo, Eamon and Donncha McCarthy, and it was interesting to hear their part and their story of farm succession and how they're going about. So look, overall, really positive vibes from the National Beef Conference this year, and I think beef farmers were leaving the event with a good sense of optimism and confidence going into the end of this year and the year ahead.
Finally, Breifne, what's the state of play on beef prices this week?
Yeah, Charles, so look, having come from historic highs, this week's factory quotes have seen the recent moves by beef processors to reduce beef prices continue. This is particularly noticeable in the cow price offers, which have been cut by up to 40 cent per kilo in cases since the end of October. Out this, they were quoting $7.10 a kilo for P-grade cows in the week following the October bank holiday, or back to $6.70 per kilo for P-grade cows earlier this week is where the quotes were at. So look, despite recent cow price cuts, prices are still approximately €2 per kilo above this time last year, when up to $4.70 was being quoted for P-grade cows. So, a little bit of a reduction there from historic highs, but, looking at it from a broader perspective, Charles, still fairly positive. But look, I suppose prime cattle prices have come under a little bit of pressure also, and offers have been cut by up to 20 cent a kilo in cases. We're seeing procurement staff moving away and less interested in entertaining flat price offers, which had been broadly available all year until now. They're more anxious to try buy prime cattle more rigidly on the grid. And, some of the higher breed bonuses also, we're seeing them edge back maybe a little bit. But again, with that in mind, prime cattle price offers are also over €2 a kilo higher than this time last year. So while they are back a little bit on recent weeks, they are still at a relatively positive level, and that overall positivity still remains in the trade. So just to give farmers, I suppose, a bit of a taste on where offers are at this week. Bullock steers have been quoted at $7.40 per kilo on the grid, with $7.50 per kilo being tabled at the higher end of the price scale for steers. Heifers are generally being quoted at $7.50, with up to $7.60 on the grid being quoted at the higher end of the price scale. So look, Christmas is fast approaching, and generally this time of the year historically sees a little bit of an increase in demand for even the prime beef cuts. So hopefully we'll see a little bit of positivity or stability and confidence return to the trade in the short term, Charles.
Thanks for all that, Breifne. Just before we move away from livestock, we'll just let you know that the Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine has issued a map outlining the predicted risk of disease caused by liver fluke infection in livestock this winter. The data predicts infection being most prevalent in the Midlands, West and Northern half of the country, with a lower disease prevalence in the Southeast. If you want to find out more about that, you can check out the article on Agriland.ie and the Agriland app. Now, there were some important announcements made for a number of farm schemes this week, Aisling, in terms of payments made and schemes opening to applications. So what do farmers need to know?
Yes, Charles, let's start with scheme openings, because the organic farming scheme opened to applications on Wednesday of this week, and it will remain open until Friday, the 12th of December. The department has told us that applications from the tillage sector will receive priority access, and a guide to the organic farming scheme application process is available on the department's website to help out potential applications. And the Minister for Agriculture, Martin Hayden, told us that over the last 5 years, the number of farmers in the organic farming scheme has increased by 221% to some 5,500, and under budget 2026, €58.6 million was earmarked for the continuation of supports for the organic sector, and also to facilitate this targeted reopening of the scheme for farmers in the tillage sector in particular. Now, elsewhere, payments under the 2025 multi-species sward and red clover silage measures began this week. Those measures were introduced by the department to promote environmentally sustainable methods of farming, which, according to the department, will have a positive impact on climate emissions, biodiversity and water quality. Payments of over €2.1 million will issue to over 1,200 farmers for these measures in the coming days, and a payment rate of €300 a hectare will apply up to a maximum of 20 hectares per measure. And as we always say, Charles, with these things with schemes, if the department is looking for information that's outstanding, make sure to get that into them as soon as possible for your payment to be processed.
Now, Aisling, you attended a community alert group meeting in your home county of Kerry this week, where the theft of livestock was discussed. And I understand there was one family there that have been particularly badly impacted by sheep theft. Can you tell us what you learned?
Yes, Charles. So we previously reported here on Agriland about how Gardaí had launched an investigation after a farmer in Kerry had reported that 150 of his sheep had been stolen. Now, Dennis O'Connor lives in Artigalvan in Headford, Killarney, and he told a local meeting this week that another 10 of his sheep had been taken just last week from his farmland, which is in the remote Clyda Valley. And the farmer believes that 160 sheep in total have now been taken from his holdings since early September. He initially noticed that 120 sheep were missing when the flock were brought in for shearing in early September. And then he was dosing the animals a few weeks later and he saw that another 29 sheep were missing. So around 3 weeks ago, he installed CCTV at the farm, which cost him around €4,000. But he did tell me that it's been very useful to detect any activity on the farm, and that all the family have the app on their phone, that if there is any detection, whether it's vehicles, humans or animals, that it will pop up on their phones. Now, the missing sheep are Mountain Cross, Texel and Cheviot Yos. They all have a notch under their right ear, and Dennis has appealed to anybody with information about the incidents to come forward. Now, Dennis was joined by his wife Marie and his son Donna, and they were part of that meeting held by the Glenflesk Community Alert group on Monday night. And Dennis told me that he's built up his flock, all of his life, Charles, and now it seems like it's gone in the blink of an eye. And Donna told me he's currently actually doing his green cert and he has plans to go farming, but all of these incidents are taking a huge toll and he feels like his future is being taken away from him, essentially, by these suspected thefts as well. Now, Dennis's wife, Marie, told me that the entire family has been broken by this entire thing and she just wants whoever is doing this to be caught and stopped. Have a listen.
For the mental health of everyone involved, there's 6 of us in the house, everyone's affected, so it's not getting any easier day by day. You're living on your nerves, and Donna's doing green cert, he wants to farm, but it's like taking his future away from him as well, so it's very hard to accept, I think.
And that was Marie O'Connor there telling us about the absolute mental toll that this has taken on the O'Connor family. Now, the Glenflesk Community Alert is planning to revive a text alert group in the locality and I suppose increase the use of social media as well. And look, along with the emotional cost and I suppose the cost of the CCTV, the farmer and his family have been left out of pocket here by around €30,000, Charles. And there was a suggestion made by somebody at the meeting this week that a GoFundMe page would be set up to help the O'Connor family. And you can find details of that on our website and app as well. And again, if you've any information in relation to those sheep, to get in touch with Gardaí locally or through the Garda Confidential line or any Garda station.
Well, it seems like the EU-Mercosur deal is constantly in the headlines this week, with the EU edging closer to ratifying the deal despite persistent concerns on its impact on the agri-food sector, especially the beef sector, in Ireland and across the EU. Aisling, we've heard from a number of high-profile political figures this week who again reiterated their views on what the problems are with this deal. So what's the latest on Mercosur, Aisling?
Yeah, so let's start closer to home. And this week Sinn Féin tabled a motion in the Dáil to oppose the Mercosur trade deal. And it led to, understandably, a highly charged debate. And there was a lot of farmers in the public gallery as well who had travelled from all over the country to look at what was happening in Leinster House about the Mercosur trade deal. Now, Sinn Féin accused the government of neglecting its responsibility when it comes to defending Irish farmers in relation to this trade deal. And Sinn Féin's spokesperson on agriculture, Martin Kenny, claimed that the government has sat back and adopted a wait-and-see approach on the trade deal. And he warned as well that Irish farmers cannot be sacrificed for German cars to be sold in South America. He said this deal is very bad for Irish agriculture and it's a bad deal as well, in his opinion, for the EU as well. And he said the threat to Irish agriculture is very real, especially to our suckler beef industries and also to our poultry sector as well. Now, in response, Minister for Agriculture Martin Hayden said that Ireland has over a number of years raised specific concerns about this trade deal and it has sought stronger trade and sustainability commitments. And he said that the government is continuing to examine, I suppose, the safeguards that have been put forward by the European Commission as a way to allay the fears of farmers, as Breifne was mentioning earlier. Obviously, that 99,000 tonnes of additional beef coming in from Mercosur at a reduced tariff rate of 7.5% over a number of years, which is one of the key sticking points for farmers as well. But the Minister did acknowledge as well that there is, as you said, increasing pressure from within the EU to move forward on this agreement. And that is something that we heard as well from MEPs this week. We were speaking with Maria Walsh because Agriland visited the European Parliament in Brussels, where we caught up with the Midlands Northwest MEP. And she said while the Mercosur trade deal might be beneficial for some sectors, it's not possible to rob from Peter to pay Paul. That old phrase, she said, we can't have trade deals that ultimately eliminate or bring us in the direction, in her eyes, of the beet and sugar factories and those closures that are all too, I suppose, familiar to farmers in this country. And of course, Maria Walsh, she's a member of the European Parliament's political grouping, the EPP in the EU. And now she said that she would continue to ensure that the voice of farmers, particularly suckler farmers, is heard. And she said that right now the scales are being tipped that Mercosur will pass. But what we do between now and then is to continue to lobby and to make sure the safeguards are in place. And on those safeguards, Fianna Fáil MEP Barry Cowan issued an update to his party colleagues this week as well, Charles, following a meeting that he had with senior European Commission officials. And he was speaking to those officials about how these proposed safeguards would work. And he said that the meeting had given him a greater sense of clarity as well about how these safeguard mechanisms would operate, along with a better understanding of how enforcement decisions would be taken in practice. And he said that the Commission officials were explicit that those 10% thresholds on preferential imports are not rigid triggers. And he said this clarification is important and should reassure farmers that enforcement will be based on common sense and market realities and not mechanical targets, which he said would be divorced from economic harm. And on a European level as well, Charles, this week the European Council approved the proposed regulation implementing safeguards for agricultural products that have been put forward by the EU Commission. They didn't put any amendments on that. And of course, the European Parliament still has to consider all of that as well. So look, a long way to go, but Mercosur very much in the headlines again this week, Charles.
Moving on now, and the Chief Executive of the Agri-Food Regulator has issued a call to action to improve fairness and transparency in the Irish food supply chain. Niamh Lenihan was speaking to Agriland this week when she made the comment. Aisling, can you tell us a bit more about what the CEO of the Agri-Food Regulator had to say?
Yeah, so of course, we know the Agri-Food Regulator was formally established back in December of 2023 by the Minister for Agriculture, Charles, I suppose all looking at the issues of unfair trading practices and bringing some fairness along the supply chain as well. And as part, as you said, of our On the Record series here in Agriland, we recently caught up with the Chief Executive of the Agri-Food Regulator, Niamh Lenihan. Now, she did tell us that it's not the regulator's job to set prices or to talk about prices, but it is the office's job to look at how value is distributed along the supply chain. And I suppose that does come on the back of supermarkets maybe cutting their own brand milk prices in recent weeks. We've also seen this week Aldi and Lidl cutting bread prices as well, and a lot of farmers wondering where the regulator stands on that and what role that they play in that. But Niamh Lenihan did stress to Agriland that all businesses in the supply chain are stakeholders of the regulator. And she said that in the time since it has been established, it has achieved lots in her view. And she stressed that a partnership approach is necessary to ensure that transparency and fairness improve across the supply chain. Take a listen.
This is a partnership approach. The regulator by itself cannot improve transparency and fairness. This is about first smaller businesses and suppliers coming to us with any issues that they're having, particularly on the unfair trading practices side, and letting us know. So we do have obviously people on the ground and we're looking at inspections, but it is very important to me particularly that people are coming forward and that they're trusting the regulator to, pick up the phone and say, look, I'm having this issue.
Now, Niamh Lenihan and other members of the Agri-Food Regulator Office also appeared before the Oireachtas Committee on Agriculture and Food this week. And last year, as we know, Charles, the regulator did appeal to the Minister for Agriculture for enhanced powers to compel businesses to provide information that is not in the public domain, but that still has not happened. And Niamh Lenihan told us this week that the regulator currently has the powers to seek information, but she said that the office's request for additional powers is still being considered from a legal perspective. And Minister Martin Hayden did tell the Dáil last month that a draft statutory instrument is now being finalised in relation to that request by the regulator for additional powers, but it's something I'm sure the regulator would rather see sooner than later.
Finally this week, we're going to bring in Cathal O'Shea. Cathal, you reported recently on a mechanical issue with a make of Calving gate that the Department of Agriculture says it's aware of. What's this about?
Yes, Charles, that's correct. A farmer recently contacted us here in Agriland about this potential flaw, which they said could prove fatal. The flaw itself lies within within the 3-in-1 calving gates that are approved under TAMS. The issue highlighted by the farmer stems from the spring-loaded vertical quick release bar, which is a required spec needed for grant approval from the Department of Agriculture. The farmer said that the issue arose when they were using the calving gate alongside a vet during a difficult calving. According to the farmer, as the cow began to put pressure on the spring-loaded bar, she managed to push the bar up and ultimately quick release herself. The farmer said they were lucky enough to be able to jump over the gate and manage to escape without injury. However, they believe that if this were to occur to someone else, that they may not be so lucky. This farmer told Agriland that they don't want to hear on the news of a farmer dying because they stayed silent. In response to the incident, the Department of Agriculture said that it's the first time that the issue had been raised to them. The department also said, now that they're aware of the issue, they're currently reviewing specs S138 as a result. Meanwhile, the Health and Safety Authority said it does not certify or approve specific equipment models under TAMS and has stated that any flaw in the mechanics should be reported to the supplier or manufacturer. The farmer said that despite both the HSA and the Department of Agriculture endorsing these gates, they will personally never use it again. And considering that 21% of farming fatalities over the last 10 years have involved animals, the farmer really wanted to highlight their experience in hopes of alerting other farmers ahead of the calving season.
Thanks for that, Cathal. Well, that's where we'll leave it for today. Just before we go, we just have time to bring you a final news update. Trade union SIPTU completed 2 12-hour work stoppages at consumer food manufacturer Carl's Cuisine in County Offaly and has planned further stoppages for the end of this week. The trade union's members at the food processing plant in Tullamore completed the 2 stoppages last Sunday and Monday and will undertake 2 further stoppages tomorrow and Saturday. But that does bring us to the end of the Farming Week for this week. Please don't forget to rate, review and follow the Farming Week on Spotify, Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. We'd love if you could spare some time to give us 5 stars and share the Farming Week with anyone you think might be interested. From Aisling, Breifne, Cathal and myself, all the best and mind the weather.